Three members of parliament didn't just disagree. They walked away, and they all walked in the same direction. Not toward a party, toward a person. In Canadian politics, floor crossing usually happens quietly. Late at night, buried in a short statement, explained away as personal reasons. This time, it was different. A Conservative MP publicly said one speech changed his mind about the country's future. And that speech came from Mark Carney. Now, in only 3 months, Pierre Poilievre has lost 3 members of his own caucus. Not scandal, not election defeat, not pressure, conviction. And analysts say that changes the meaning of the story completely. Because once is an incident, twice is concern, 3 times becomes a pattern. The newest MP to cross over explained his decision with unusual clarity. He said a global economic address reshaped how serious Canada's moment really is, and remaining on the sidelines no longer felt honest. He reached out himself. No negotiations, no reported bargaining, no visibility worth. That matters, because political opportunism looks for advantage. Political realignment looks for direction. This wasn't about a local riding issue. It wasn't about party discipline. It was about worldview. The speech he referenced happened at World Economic Forum in Davos, a stage where leaders speak not to voters, but to history. And for some conservatives, that international positioning signaled something unexpected, long-term strategy. Analysts began noticing a shift. Members weren't reacting to short-term domestic politics. They were reacting to perceived national direction. That is rare in parliamentary politics. Usually MPs move when elections approach. Here, movement happened during stability, which suggests motivation came from belief, not survival. Even more striking, some commentators observed that certain economic positions sounded closer to center-right frameworks than traditional liberal leadership. In other words, ideological overlap, a political crossover zone, and suddenly, Carney appeared to be standing directly inside it. Meanwhile, the opposition leader faced a different kind of week. Instead of focusing on affordability and inflation, his strongest terrain, attention turned inward. Questions shifted from policy to cohesion. 3 departures alone would raise eyebrows. But they arrived alongside messaging conflicts and internal disagreements being discussed publicly. That combination matters more than numbers. Because in parliamentary systems, authority doesn't just come from seats. It comes from unity. Lose votes, you recover. Lose narrative control, you struggle. Lose caucus confidence, you weaken. Analysts put it bluntly. 3 members leaving is a lot for any opposition leader. Not catastrophic, but unmistakable. And the political damage isn't mathematical, it's psychological. Once colleagues begin moving, every remaining member is quietly evaluated through a new question. Who's next? That transforms a personnel story into a leadership stability story. Commentators then widen the lens. They described a coalition balancing regional priorities, international positioning, and internal ideology, now facing tension as Canada's global stance becomes more assertive. So this may not be about personalities at all. It may be about alignment. One vision pulling outward, another holding structure together. And in politics, gravity decides direction long before elections do. Because voters watch speeches, but politicians watch trajectories. And when elected officials start changing sides without an election forcing them to, they're not reacting to the present. They're positioning for the future, which raises the real question, not why 3 MPs crossed the floor, but what they believe is coming next. But the real story isn't just movement, it's direction. This single decision moved the governing party 1 seat closer to a majority, a threshold that changes how power operates in parliament. And analysts are now using a word they rarely use lightly, historic, because upcoming by-elections could amplify the shift. And on-air discussions have already begun speculating about additional members reconsidering their positions. If even one more follows, the entire political map tilts. The MP at the center of this move, representing Edmonton Riverbend, didn't arrive alone in the conversation. Government officials publicly welcomed him, describing recognition of a new reality and a shared plan for the country's priorities. Notice the language carefully. Not victory, not recruitment, recognition. That distinction matters. What makes this moment unusual isn't praise from allies. It's validation emerging from across the aisle. When a sitting conservative says a global address reshaped his political thinking about Canada's future, that crosses beyond party debate. It enters ideology. In parliamentary systems, crossing the floor is one of the highest risk decisions an elected official can make. It risks reputation. It risks voter trust. It risks career stability. So when it happens repeatedly, analysts stop asking who left and start asking what changed. Because moves like this rarely come from a single disagreement. They come from perception of trajectory. The speech cited by multiple commentators signaled something broader, not just domestic policy, but national posture, economic credibility, international positioning, long-term seriousness, and that is traditionally territory guarded by conservative messaging, which is why observers say Mark Carney isn't simply expanding support. He may be expanding political space. Meanwhile, for Pierre Poilievre, the challenge compounds differently. Each departure isn't only arithmetic. It's psychological. Inside every caucus, unity functions like infrastructure, invisible when stable, highly visible when strained. And once internal questions begin, pressure changes form. It stops being external competition. It becomes structural doubt. This is how momentum shifts in democracies, not through dramatic confrontations, but through gradual realignments of trust. Analysts describe a leadership style being perceived as less tactical and more directional, a narrative that resonates with members prioritizing long-term positioning over short-term opposition. That perception alone can move politics, because elected officials don't just react to polls. They react to where they believe the country is heading. 3 departures in 3 months is not random noise. It's signal. A signal that alignment may be reorganizing across traditional party boundaries. And in politics, momentum often decides outcomes before ballots ever do. So the real question isn't whether this story is significant. It's whether it's the beginning. If you want clear, fact-driven analysis of the leadership dynamics shaping Canada's future, subscribe to the channel. We don't chase headlines. We decode the forces behind them. Share your perspective below, because this story is still unfolding.